without due consideration for what? Their safety. Examples of unsafe acts.
Horseplay.
Horseplay. Unsafe act, horseplay. Testing of what? Electricity with your bare hands. I see some electricians test for electricity with their bare hands. What are they doing? That is what? An unsafe act. You see some people testing batteries with their tongue. That is what? Unsafe behavior. You are testing for electricity with your bare hands. Some people drive without what? Seat belts. That's what? An unsafe act. Use of what? The wrong tool for the right job is what? An unsafe act. When you are using a screwdriver where you are expected to use a spanner, you are engaging in what? Unsafe acts. Unsafe behavior. What is the difference between a behavior and an act? A behavior is what? A repeated act. Overspeeding. You see some of our drivers, they say, if I never shy you, I no fit drive. If they don't drink, they can't what? Drive. That is what? An unsafe what? Behavior. Driving without what? Seat belt. Non-usage of PPE. What is PPE? Personal what? Protective equipment. We'll talk about it. Personal what? Protective what? Equipment. The usage of PPE, we refer to it as what? Unsafe what? Behavior. Risk tolerance. Some people get so used, there's risk tolerance. Some people get so used to a job that they say they can do it with their eyes closed. At that point, when you are becoming negligent, you should know that an accident is what? About to what? Happen. So, why do organizations what? Practice safety. Having talked about hazards, near miss, unsafe acts, unsafe behavior, we said that if hazards, near misses, unsafe acts, and unsafe behaviors are not controlled, it leads to what? An accident. These accidents can be life-threatening. It can be what? Life-threatening. It can lead to permanent disability, temporary disability, and even total loss of life, or in some cases, there's what we refer to as first aid case, or you sustain what? Injury. It can be major and you what? Lead to what? Loss of life, fatality, and what? Death. So having said that, why do organizations practice safety? Why do organizations what? Practice what? Safety. We have established a background of what accidents are, what near misses are, what unsafe acts are, what unsafe behaviors are, what unsafe conditions are. We've talked about injury. We've talked about fatality. We've talked about the losses that come with accidents. We've carried out some basic definitions. Why do companies practice safety? We look at why do companies practice safety. Then from why do companies practice safety, we now look at hierarchy of risk control. When these hazards are identified, when these unsafe acts are identified, unsafe behaviors are identified, how do you control them? So let's start from what? Why do companies practice safety? There are basically three reasons why what? Companies what? Practice safety. There are how many reasons? Three reasons why organizations and companies practice what? Safety. Number one is what we call for moral reasons. Reputation. Moral / reputation / humanitarian reasons. Moral reasons, humanitarian reasons, and for the sake of their reputation. What is moral? Morals mean that if you come into an environment, a work environment, your work environment becomes your family. Yes or no? We are working with people from 8 to 4 every day. 8 to 4 every day. Those people become what? Your family. And so whatever affects Mr. A affects Mr. B. True or false? Whatever affects Mr. A affects Mr. B. And so for that moral reasons, to ensure you have a free, safe, productive environment, organizations engage in what? Occupational safety and health. It is also to provide what we call what? Positive safety what? Culture. Just like we said that culture is a total way of life of an individual, organizations try as much as possible to provide what we refer to as what? A positive safety what? Culture. That's an environment where everybody is happy, productive, and what? Creative. How do you achieve that? By creating an enabling environment through occupational safety and health principles and what? Policies. Reputation. When talking about reputation, I always ask this question. When you go to an eatery and you see hair in whatever they give to you, will you ever go to that eatery again? No. So, companies what? Protect their reputation by ensuring what? Occupational safety and health principles and what? Standards. That talks about what? Reputation. Reputation. If a product or an organization's product and services is always having safety and quality issues, will you engage the services of that organization? No. I'll talk about that when using how many of us, we heard about the Ikoyi building collapse? And the people that lost their life in that what? Incident. That was a combination of both safety and quality what? Violations. If that organization is going to bid for another contract, who do you think will engage such company? They have what? A negative safety what? Culture. And those are the issues companies try as much as possible to protect by ensuring what? Good safety and quality what? Standards. I've talked about morals, reputation, and humanitarian reasons. An organization that is always getting involved in what? Accidents. For instance, if you have somebody going to what? Recruitment, or going for an interview in an organization that is always getting involved in an accident, you will always have fear and doubts in your mind. That is one of the first reasons why companies practice occupational safety and health principles. For what? For moral reasons, for reputation, and for what? Humanitarian reasons. Now, the second reason is what we refer to as what? Economic reasons. I've flogged economic reasons long enough. Economic reasons. What is economics? Money, naira, and what? Kobo. If every day companies' properties are being destroyed, within a space of time, that company goes out of what? Existence, or out of business. Because every organization is built for profit making. And one thing that can deplete your profit and your base, financial base, is consistent what? Losses. For instance, I don't know how many we have next cash and carry in the 6 geopolitical zones. The one in North Central just got burnt. That means they are left with 5. God forbid another one gets burnt. They are left with what? 4. By the time another one gets burnt, what does that tell you? The company is what? Going out of operation what? Gradually. So to what? To ensure that your business remains competitive by virtue of the assets you have, you must ensure occupational safety and health principles and procedures to prevent what? Accidents. The third reason why companies practice safety is what? For legal reasons. For what? Legal reasons. We started from ushers. We talked about occupational safety and health administration. Ushers is law. And the laws, every company, every nation has signed into ushers, making what? Occupational health and safety principles a must for all industries. We have laws like international labor organizations that dictate what every organization must do in their company in regards to occupational safety and health. We have ILO, we have ILO, the version of ILO in Nigeria is NLC, Nigerian Labour Congress. We have Factories Act, we have the act that was signed in 2000 that all companies and all organizations must manage occupational safety and health within what? Their environment. Those are the 3 reasons why companies practice safety. The next thing we are going to talk about in this section is hierarchy of risk control. Hierarchy of what? Risk control. Hierarchy of risk control. Before I talk about the hierarchy of risk control, let me talk about risk. Because having identified hazards, the next thing is, how do I control these hazards? Because we said that accident is a progression of what? Uncontrolled hazards, uncontrolled near misses, uncontrolled unsafe acts, unsafe behaviors. These are the things: unsafe acts, unsafe behavior, risk tolerance are what we leads to what? Builds up to an accident. Just like it is said, a stitch in time does what? Saves 9. And so if hazards, near misses, unsafe acts, unsafe behaviors are left uncontrolled, the resultant effect is what? An accident. So when hazards are identified, how do we control? There are basically 5 processes used for what? Risk control. But before I talk about risk control, what is risk? Before I talk about risk control, let's talk about what is what? Risk. Risk is the probability that a hazard will cause harm. There is a probability that what? A hazard will cause harm. And the severity of the harm it will cause. It will cause. The probability that a hazard will cause harm and the severity of the harm it will cause. What does that mean to you? Some will say the likelihood that a hazard will cause harm and the consequence of the harm it causes is referred to as what? Risk. What does it mean to you? I give you a layman's example, a common example, and we build on it. If a family member is traveling by the daytime and is traveling by night, which is more risky? You find out that night journeys are what? Why do you say night journeys are risky? Because there is a likelihood and what? The severity. The likelihood that what? A hazard will cause harm and the severity of the harm it will cause makes reference to what we refer to as what? Risk. Let me illustrate this with a practical example. If you are traveling by air and you are traveling by road, which is more risky? You find out that traveling by road and traveling by air, which is safer, how do you arrive at such conclusions? Or traveling by air and traveling by road, which is more risky? Let's look at it. We said that what? We said that risk is the probability of a hazard causing what? A harm. And the severity of the harm it causes. So when you are looking at what? Risk, which is probability times severity, or likelihood times what? Consequence. That is the risk. We're now going to do risk assessment is done on a template called risk assessment template. We use a template called what? The risk assessment template to conduct what? Risk assessment. How does this risk assessment template look like? The risk assessment template is numbered from 1 to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and what? 5. This is it. Then we have what? You have your probability and you have your severity. So if I'm traveling by road, let's say from Warri to Bayelsa or Yenagoa, what is the probability of getting involved in an accident? The probability of getting involved in an accident from traveling from Warri to Bayelsa may be 2. If you are involved in an accident traveling from Warri to Bayelsa, we say the probability is what? 2. And what will be the severity? Let's say the severity is what? 3. So what is the risk factor? The risk factor will be what? The probability times what? The severity, which is what? 2 times 3, which is equals to what? 6. It's what? 6. What if I'm traveling by air? Probability road is what? The risk road is 6. Or the severity can be 4. And 2 times 4, 2 times 4 is what? 8. Now let's look at the risk involved with traveling with air. The probability involved in traveling by air is what? What's the probability of getting involved in an air crash? Traveling from Warri to Asaba or from Warri to Yenagoa is 1. The probability is 1 because it rarely happens. And what is the severity? The severity can be what? 4. So the risk is 1 times 4, which is equal to what? 4. So 8 versus 4, which one is lower? 4 is lower than 8, meaning that what? Traveling by air is what? Safer. Now, let me give you what these ratings mean. If you conduct a risk assessment and your ratings are from 0 to 9, it refers to as what? Low risk. If a risk assessment is conducted and you have 0 to 9, it is referred to as what? Low risk. 10 to 15 is medium. Medium. And 16 and above is what? High risk operation. High risk what? Operation. So when you have a high risk operation, you have medium risk, you introduce controls to bring it to what? Low. Does that make sense? When you conduct a risk assessment and you are having anything in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 or 16 and above, you have to introduce controls to bring it to what? Low risk. What are those control measures? Those control measures is what we refer to as hierarchy of what? Risk control. Those control measures are what? We refer to as what? The hierarchy of risk control. We are talking about the hierarchy of what? Risk control. What does it mean? Hierarchy of risk control refers or means that when a hazard is identified, when an unsafe act is identified, unsafe behaviors identified, what are the principles, what are the methodologies used in controlling such unsafe acts, unsafe behaviors, or unsafe conditions? We refer to it as what? The hierarchy of what? Risk control. The first on the list is what? Elimination. The first is what? Elimination. And what is elimination? Elimination talks about what? The total removal of what? The hazard. Total what? Removal of what? The hazard. Total what? Removal of what? The hazards. And most times, when handling this class, I always tempt ladies by saying that it's just like a woman, a married woman, who discovers the husband has a side chick. What's the first thing that comes into the woman's mind to eliminate the woman? True or false?
False. The husband is the problem, not the side.
That's that. So elimination is, for instance, when you discover a hazard in a workplace, the first attempt is to completely what? Remove the hazards. For instance, you have a building with asbestos. We have said that asbestos has what? Negative tendencies. So, your first reaction is to completely remove asbestos. True or false?
True.
But one thing about asbestos is that asbestos on its own is not dangerous. Asbestos becomes dangerous when it is disturbed. What does it mean disturbed? That is when there's maintenance work going on asbestos. You see somebody painting. Does it mean we should stop painting? Does it mean we should stop using chemicals?
No.
Now, if an accident occurs, another vehicle will convey the victims to what? The hospital or the mortuary, as the case may be. So does it mean we should stop using vehicles? So that brings us to the concept of what we refer to as what? ALAP. What does this mean? ALAP means that hazards may not be completely what? Eliminated. We can only bring them to as low as is reasonably what? Practicable. As low as it's what? Reasonably what? Practicable. That means when you identify a hazard, even though your first reaction is to eliminate, you may not practically be able to what? Eliminate a hazard. You can only what? Bring it to as low as is reasonably or practicably what? Possible. Like the asbestos I talked about, or I made reference to. When asbestos is discovered in an environment, or asbestos roof is discovered, even when you are removing the asbestos, you need to put in controls. Where are you going to dispose the asbestos? You also need to what? Put it under what? Controls. And there are materials we also refer to as asbestos-containing materials. So, all you need to do is to what? Bring the hazards to as low as is reasonably what? Practicable. Number 2 is substitution. Number 2 is what? Substitution. Like when bread was being, we were producing breads with bromates. And when we discovered that bromates are dangerous for human health, what did we do? We stopped using bromates and we started using another substance. What did we do there? We have substituted. I'm coming to that. That is what substitution. Then you look at telecom industry in Nigeria. When telecommunication industry came into Nigeria, how were we using our recharge card? We were scratching those recharge cards. In the early 2000s, when phones came into Nigeria, you find out our 100 naira recharge card, 200 naira recharge card had a silver panel. And you scratch. And it was discovered that those materials are what? Cancerous. So what did we do? We did what? We eliminated that hazard by carrying out what? Substitution. Such that what? Your recharge cards now are printed on paper. You don't need to scratch. That is what? Substitution. Introducing a less dangerous process for a more harmful process is referred to as what? Substitution. The next is engineering controls. The next is what? Engineering controls. Engineering controls basically talks about removing the hazards or creating a barrier between the hazard and the what? Operators. For instance, you see companies making use of what? You see companies making use of automatic doors. Automatic doors, automatic floors. Now, engineering controls. When you go to some industrial environments, you see some machineries that use what we call interlocks. What is an interlock? Interlock is an engineering device that prevents an individual from coming close to rotating parts of machineries. That is, when you are coming close to this machine, the machine stops what? Working. Or the rolling part stops what? Operating. To serve as a barrier between you and what? The rolling part. When you go, there's what we refer to as, under engineering control, there's what we refer to as what? Machine guardings. The easiest machine guard you find around is when you go close to NEPA poles or H-pole transformers. You see them, they are guarded. They use barricades to separate them. Another engineering control is the use of CCTV. You go into some environment and you are being monitored. Everything that is being done is monitored by what? A camera. You go close to some vehicles, there is automatic alarms. You go close to some environments, there is automatic what? Lightning in security. Those are all what? Engineering what? Controls. In the banking industry, there was a time in Nigerian banks when somebody can just put a short pistol in his pocket and walk into the bank. Yes or no? Yes. He walks into the bank quietly. He walks into the bank quietly and puts everybody under pressure. But today, can you walk into a bank? I don't know the last time a bank was robbed in Nigeria as a result of what? Engineering control. What engineering control are they using now? It's called metal detectors. When you come close to the gate or the access door of a bank premises now, as a result of engineering controls, you find out that what? You cannot even enter because the doors will be what? Shut as a result of what? Metal what? Detectors. Engineering control is the use of what? Science and technology and engineering devices to detect and control what? Hazards. In some vehicles now there's speed limits. We have speed limiters in some vehicles. If you go into an industrial environment and you see forklifts, forklifts have what we call reverse alarms. They are electric forklifts that are silent, and when they are moving, you don't even notice their motion. But because of these engineering controls, they have introduced what we call what? Reverse what? Alarms. And so when the forklift is reversing, all you hear is ping, 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 ping. So these are what? Devices meant to what? Communicate hazards using science and what? Technology. Then there's one from engineering controls, we have administrative controls. Administrative control is the use of jingles. The use of what? Jingles. Signs. Symbols. The use of what? Jingles. Signs. Symbols. To communicate what? Hazards. Pictogram. Pictures. To communicate what? Hazards. Administrative controls, we said is the use of what? Signs, symbols, jingles, to communicate what? Hazards. If you are traveling, you see sharp bend. If you go to industries, you see high noise area. You see do not enter. Do not climb.
Authorized personnel.
Authorized personnel only. No nose marks, no what? No entry. These are all what? Administrative what? Controls. The last but not the least is the use of PPE. From administrative controls, we talk about the use of PPE. We refer to it as what? The last line of defense. We refer to it as what? The last line of what? Defense. PPE means what? Personal protective what? Equipment. Personal what? Protective what? Equipment. These are equipments that are worn to serve as a barrier between the wearer and the what? The hazards. Note, personal protective equipment does not remove the hazards. It only limits what? The impact. When you are putting on a hazard, that does not mean when you crash, you won't sustain injury. But it limits or reduces the impact of the crash. And so, by putting on PPE, examples of PPE, we talk about hard hats, eye goggles, nose mask, respiratory mask cartridge, safety boot, hand gloves, ear muffs, eye goggles, etc. to serve as a barrier between the wearer and the what? The hazards. And it's referred to as the last line of what? Defense. Some people will tell you, I was putting on PPE and I was still engaged in an accident. The fact that you are putting on a seatbelt does not mean an accident will not occur, but it will limit your speed at which you travel in case of an incident. That is just to limit the impact of what? The accident, in case an accident what? Occurs. So the next thing we are going to talk about is incident investigation and what? Analysis. In this section, we're going to talk about what? Incident investigation and analysis. From the name, incident investigation and what? Analysis. What is incident investigation and analysis? We have been talking about safety principles, policies, and guidelines. And we're now talking about the methodologies we use to what? Manage safety in an organization. There's what we call active management system and what? Reactive management system. In safety management systems, there's what we refer to as what? Active management system and reactive management system. When do you say a management system is active? A management system is active. What does it mean? A lot of times people say our government is not active, they are not proactive, they are not proactive. What does it mean? That means, what does that mean to us in safety? It means that when we are talking about an active or proactive safety system, we are talking about a safety system that tries as much as possible to what? Envisage accidents before they happen. And so, when you envisage accidents before they happen, we refer to it as active what? Monitoring. But when you begin to react to an accident, when an accident has happened, that's when you start running helter-skelter. What are you doing? You are being reactive. And so there are tools and techniques you have to deploy to ensure you have an active what? Monitoring system in your workplace. Part of what we want to discuss under incident investigation and analysis now is just what? A reaction. A reactionary measure. After putting in all the principles, all the policies, all the procedures, and an accident happens. Maybe somebody falls from height, like a pack of cards. Somebody is climbing a ladder, he falls. Somebody is on the third floor of a building, he's making a call, he misjudges his position and he falls to the ground. A NEPA official is putting his hands through a horizontal or vertical position and a machinery cuts it off. Or somebody is working on an MTN mask and he falls. Or a rooftop worker is carrying out roofing in an organization and there's issue, he falls to the ground. Or they are right now as we speak, people are carrying out oil exploration on rigs. And the platform collapses and they find themselves in water. What do? Or some of us, domestic, you are frying your plantain and you see fire, boom! I've seen gas explosion. One thing that is happening in our environment now is that you see gas plants being built everywhere. Imagine there's a gas explosion now and everywhere is burning, and after the accident, what do? I was watching the network news yesterday and I think there's a market that just got burnt in Lagos. Every year we hear of fire outbreaks. Every day we hear of environmental damage. Every day we hear of one form of accident or the other. So if an accident has occurred, we carry out what we call incident investigation and analysis. We carry out what we call what? Incident investigation and what? Analysis. So what is incident investigation and analysis? What is what? Incident investigation and analysis. Incident investigation and analysis is a careful observation of an incident or a careful analysis of an incident to identify two factors. To identify what? Two factors. What are those factors? Number one is what we call the root cause. Two is what we call what? The causal factor. Number one is what? The root cause. Number two is what? The causal what? Factor. So when an incident occurs, you don't just fold your hands. In human beings, when somebody dies, what do? We carry out what? Autopsy. So autopsy to us in safety is what we refer to as what? Incident investigation and what? Analysis. A careful analysis of the cause of an incident to determine what went wrong or why did the incident and how the incident happened. We refer to it as what? Incident investigation and what? Analysis. Why do we conduct incident investigation and analysis? The next question is why? One is to prevent what? Reoccurrence. Number two is to learn lessons. One is to what? Prevent reoccurrence, learn lessons, pay compensations. And number four, it's a legal requirement. When an incident happens, the law requires that you what? Produce an incident investigation and what? An analysis. One, prevent reoccurrence, learn lessons, pay for compensations and damages, environmental cleanups, and it's what? A legal what? Requirement. How do we conduct incident investigation and analysis? How do you conduct incident investigation and what? Analysis. For instance, how many of you know what we call forklifts? A forklift steps on somebody now. What do? I've seen forklifts turn and lift people. Or the fork of a forklift falls to the ground and crashes. Or you may have seen a site where a crane operation is going on and the slings cut off and the whole thing the crane is lifting comes back on the ground and buries an individual. Or a crane topples. Or a crane, I've seen cranes lifting a load. As the crane is lifting, it begins to sink back into the ground. We've seen boat mishaps. We've seen platforms catch fire. So when such incidents happen, what do? You carry out what we call what? Incident investigation and what? Analysis. First and foremost, how do you conduct incident investigation and analysis? The first thing you do is to what? Cordon off the entire area. C-O-R-D-O-N. Cordon off what? The entire area. When you cordon off the entire area, why do you cordon off the entire area? To prevent distortion of what? Information. Evacuate people to what? People that need to be evacuated to mortuary, people that need to be evacuated to medical center, evacuate them to what? Medical center. Cordon off what? The environment. Then conduct interviews. Conduct what? It is worthy of note. You have to note that incident investigation and analysis is not for fault finding. It's not for what? It's not for what?
Fault finding.
It's not for fault finding, but for what? Fact finding mission. It's not for what? Fault finding, but a fact finding what? Mission. It's not for fault finding, it's for what? Fact what? Finding. How do you conduct incident investigation and analysis? We say cordon off the place, conduct interviews, ask leading question. What happened? What went wrong? What happened? What went wrong? Where did it happen? How did it happen? Who was involved? What was the damage caused? What was the damage caused? Then build a sequence of what? Events. That is A led to B and B added to C and resulted in D. Build a sequence of what? Events. For instance, a crane. You are investigating an accident where a crane, the slings fell, cut off, or a crane was lifting a load and it cuts off and buries down people. The question is, what happened? The question of what happened is what? The slings of a crane cut off and what? The load it was carrying came back to the ground. How many people were injured? 2 people were what? Injured. 1 was injured, 1 was buried alive. The next question is, where did it happen? It happened at point A, B, C, D. How did it happen? The crane was lifting and in the midst of the lift, it cut off and came down. Why did it cut off? That is where you now begin to build what? A series of events. How did Mr. B get under the lift? What took him under the lift? What was he doing under the lift? Was he not trained? Because the first instruction is that when a crane lifting operation is taking place, nobody should be within what? The vicinity of the lift. You only direct the crane from what? A distance. So, and also anybody who walks towards the crane to direct it is doing it at his own what? Risk. But if you do that without what? Proper information, anything that happens to that man, you are going to pay for his what? Medical bills. And you're going to compensate his family for killing him on your premises. And that's the relevance of training and training documents. So you now build a sequence of events. If a crane is lifting a load and the load falls to the ground, what do you think is the cost? The slings were not properly tested, or they were not properly hooked. Or at times a crane is lifting and the crane begins to sink into the ground. That means that you are using a crane that is not what? Does not have enough capacity for the load you are using it to carry. Does the crane have an in-date certificate of fitness or of thorough examination? These are all things that needs to be what? Documented. So after building a sequence of events, the next thing you do is to what? Write your report and what? Recommendation. What does it mean to write your report and recommendation? Your report and recommendation means what? You set out your findings, you write out your findings, and you recommend reports for correction of what? The incident that has what? Happened. That is how we carry what? Carry out what? Incident investigation and what? Analysis. So we have successfully talked about, introduced ourselves to the concept of safety. The concept of safety. Some basic terms in safety. Why organizations practice safety. The definition of accidents. What causes accidents? We say human beings cause accidents. How do human beings cause accidents? By getting involved with what? Unsafe acts, unsafe behaviors, and what? Unsafe conditions. Now, what is the hierarchy of risk control? And we have talked about what? Incident investigation and what? Analysis. We have talked about what? The hierarchy of risk control. We have talked about incident investigation and what? Analysis. We will continue from here in a short while. In this section, we are going to be basically looking at three things. Three things we are going to look at in this section. The first thing we are going to look about in this session is what I refer to as PTW, which is permit to work. Number two is we are going to look at fire, and we will look at unsafe act auditing. We'll look at permit to work. We'll look at fire. Take a look at fire. What is fire? What is permit to work? Why do we make use of permit to work? What are the concepts under permit to work? And what is the importance of permit to work? And we'll also look at fire. What is fire? What causes fire? How do we manage fire? How do we control fire? How do we limit fire? How do we control and prevent fire? What are fire detection and suppression systems? And lastly, we look at unsafe act auditing. We have looked at unsafe act, and we are equally going to look at unsafe act auditing. Why do organizations carry out unsafe act audits? What is the importance of unsafe act audits? And what are the offshoots or outputs of unsafe act audit? So let's look at permit to work. Why do we make use of permit to work? What is permit to work? Now, if you look at an organization like the construction industry, or you look at a banking hall, for instance, what are the normal operations that goes on in the banking industry? In the banking industry, you find out that the basic work that goes on there is what? Deposit and withdrawal of cash. True or false? You find out that they are always carrying out what? Cash or financial transactions. At least the basic elementary activities that goes on in a bank is what? Financial transactions. So if the vault or the AC, air conditioning system is faulty, and somebody is coming to carry out repair on that air conditioning system, we now refer to such a job as what? A non-routine job. So when we are talking about P3W or permit to work, we look at two types of job, which we refer to as what? The routine job and the non-routine what? Jobs. When you come to the oil and gas sector, for instance, most of the jobs they do on a daily basis is some of them depending on either it is an offshore platform or a downstream platform. Maybe in the downstream, what they basically do on a daily basis is what? Loading of PMS, production of lubricants, loading operation in the warehouse, offloading of raw materials, etc., etc. But there are times they receive their base oil. They will be receiving their base oil, or from time to time they carry out what we call what? Vessel receipts. So these operations that don't happen on a regular basis, we refer to them as non-routine jobs. The jobs they do on a daily basis is what we refer to as what? Routine work. The jobs they do on what? A daily basis. We refer to them as what? Routine work, routine jobs. We use the job permit to monitor what? Jobs that are non-routine. These are what? Jobs that are not what? Non-routine. They don't happen on a daily basis. Now, why do we have to monitor these jobs that don't happen on a daily basis? Because of what? The incidents and accidents that can occur as a result of these jobs that are not done on a daily basis. They may have what? As a result of the fact that we are not doing them on a daily basis, we need to carefully evaluate them, identify the hazards associated with these jobs to ensure that they don't lead to what? Accidents. And that's why we refer to them as what? Non-routine what? Jobs. And so what is a work permit? A work permit, first and foremost, it's a document. It is what? A document. It evaluates the hazards associated with a job before the job starts. That is what? Before the job starts, while the work is going on, and at the end of the job to ensure that all hazards associated with the job are what? Identified and controlled. What does that mean? What it means is that before any non-routine job is done, you must carry out what? A work permit to what? Identify what? The hazards associated with the job before the job starts, while the work is going on, and at the end of the job to ensure that all the hazards associated with the job are identified and controlled. The nature of the job is put into consideration. The number of personnel carrying out the jobs are put into consideration. The duration of the job is put into consideration. And at the end of the job, the PPE requirement, the emergency procedures required during the job are also what? Put into what? Consideration. And so we have said that a job permit is what? A document. It evaluates the hazards associated with the job before the job starts, while the work is going on, and at the end of the job to ensure that all the hazards are what? Identified and what? Controlled. Example. For instance, if a company is carrying out what we call vessel receipts. What is vessel receipts? You know that all the PMS we use in Nigeria, most of them are not produced in Nigeria. And what it means is that a ship comes into Apapa or any of the ports, and the PMS is pumped into any of the what? Stations, any of the what? Premises of the organizations we are talking about, like Mobil, Shell, and the rest of them. Such an operation is referred to as what? A non-routine operation. What are the hazards associated with those jobs? You can see in the course of pumping, there can be burst of the pipelines. The pipeline connecting what? The jetty and the premises can be broken. If you are carrying out vessel receipt, for instance, and you are carrying out what? Welding, what do you think can happen? For instance, you are pumping PMS into your premises, and somebody is carrying out welding operation. What do you think you are inviting? You are inviting what? Fire. So in such operations that are not carried out on a daily basis, we use what we call the permit to work to monitor such operation. What are the concepts under work permit? Under work permit, we have two, three, or four concepts. The first concept is asset holder or custodian. Or like the banking industry I talked about, if a laptop or a computer system or the vault in a bank is faulty, and you are coming into that bank premises to what? Work on the vault in the bank, such a job is referred to as what? A non-routine operation. And so if a company A, for instance, a bank called ABCD, is employing your services to come and carry out an operation, the man that is inviting you to come into their premises is referred to as what? Asset what? Holder. Does that make sense? This is Export Global Consult. For instance, if Export Global Consult is inviting a company called ABC to come and carry out what? Installation of what? An AC. Who is the asset holder? The Export Global, who is inviting ABCD to come and carry out the operation, is referred to as what? The asset what? Holder. The asset holder will determine the duration of your job, the timing of your job, and the safety principles, policies, and guidelines that will be upheld within their premises. From the asset holder or custodian, we have what? We have what we call the permit applicant. Who is the permit applicant? The company going into another premises to carry out an operation is referred to as what? Permit what? Applicant. For instance, the man coming into Export Global to carry out installation of the AC is referred to as what? Permit what? Applicant. So for instance, if I am going into a bank called ABCD to carry out installation now, the company going into another premises to carry out what? Any form of job is referred to as what? Permit what? Applicant. Then from the permit applicant, we have what? The permit holder. That's the third concept. The third concept is what? The permit what? Holder. And who is the permit holder? The permit holder in an organization that may have up to 4, 5, 10, 20 staff. The people working in that premises at a point in time is referred to as what? The permit what? Holder. Maybe you have 2 or 3 people working in a premises. We refer to those 3 people as what? The permit what? Holder. Does that make sense? That is, if I have 10 staff in a company A, I have 5 in company B, and I have 3 in company C. At that particular location, the people working in that location from my organization part-time are referred to as what? The permit what? Holder. The last but not the least is validity of work permits. The last but not the least is what? Validity of what? Work permit. Validity of work permit talks about how long does a work permit last. If you are issued a work permit, how long should it last? You are going into Shell premises to carry out an operation. You are going into Chevron premises to carry out an operation. You are going into a bank industry to carry out an operation. How long should you stay in these premises? Some organizations will issue you work permit for 1 day. That's from 8 to 4. From what? 8 to what? 4. That means after 4 o'clock, we don't want to see you in our what? Premises. Anything that happens to you after 4, we are not accountable. Because when you come into the premises of an organization, the organization becomes responsible for you within the period you are going to spend in that organization. There are some organizations that will give you work permit for the duration of your job. That means if your job is going to last for 1 month, if your job is going to last for 3 months, if your job is going to last for 6 months, they give you a work